Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Back to Brilliance podcast. We're your hosts, Henry and Joseph. Thanks for tuning in. We ask that wherever you listen, that you would give a subscribe, leave a comment or review. Helps great people like you find the podcast. And we appreciate you for tuning in. With that, we're going to go ahead and get into our topic today. Today, we're talking about the value that you give is the value that you get. With that, I want to introduce our co-host, Joseph. Say what's up, Joseph, and go ahead and lead us in, bro.
Hey, how's it going? Yeah, so basically, being a breath of fresh air for someone or just people around you, right? You want to leave an impression on people, and not only will that be very uplifting internally, but it will also reflect externally, and that will create momentum for you. It will help build a community around you and just improve your life.
Right, right, and that's what bringing that value is all about. You know, it's a law of reciprocation. You give, you get, right? So it's the value of giving, so that you can get, and bring that breath of fresh air. You know, is refreshing. You know, and helping others solving their problems. It also, you know, in turn, you find solutions for our own problems. You know.
Definitely, definitely. And just being a positive force for others, right? Being someone who others want to be around, being someone who people look up to, being that positive light for people.
Yeah, and we've all been around a lot of the negativity, you know, and it drains your energies. You know, you go to a place and you're, you know, uplifted, and you hear all the problems and all the stuff, and you're like, oh man, you know. So, you know, you want to go to a place, you know, where you're offering that value, you know, you're bringing that breath of fresh air, you know, and being refreshed, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And just what I like to think about it as, and this is something that I've been trying to do, and I've been told before, but just be someone where whenever you leave, there's like a, ooh, I want more of that, right? Being someone where whenever you're in the room, you're known, right? You know whenever someone is in there, right? Be the mood shifter or be the mood changer, right? Just being someone who stands out. You don't need to like command the space inherently, but just being like someone that whenever you're in the room, people realize you are, and that you're, someone who's fun to be around.
Right. No, and that's true, bro. You know, and not to toot my own horn, but that's kind of where I'm at. You know, buddy of mine's, he just sent me a message this morning, actually, and he's my golf buddy, and he's like, I've been golfing all these years. You know, it was a competitiveness and stuff like that, but he was just sharing, like, you know, he's never had this much fun when me and him go out and we golf and stuff like that. So that was refreshing to me, you know, that the impact that I have is, you know, making him laugh and we're just having a good time. So, you know, for me, it's I value those type of relationships. I value, you know, bringing that value to people and receiving that value, because again, I receive that when I'm around them. So it's always good, you know, to be that breath of fresh air, you know. And if you find yourself, you know, around people that are not, you know, you just give, you know, and you're going to receive in the end, you know.
Yeah, definitely. It attracts good people around you. And on top of that, just being someone who's always putting others up instead of talking negatively about others, right?
Hmm.
I try to make it a point to not talk bad about people. There's a term called backbiting. I really don't like to backbite,
Right.
right? So if someone's in the group and I'm not too happy with that person, I typically don't even bring them up because it's a waste of energy. I'm not perfect about it,
Right. Right.
um, but if someone is who I don't care for is not in the group, why bring them up in the first place, right? You're just inviting negative energy, and you're not being a light for someone. You're being almost like a dimming light for someone, right? Because you're putting someone down. And then let's say it's like a friend in the group. Well, then those people who you're talking to, they could be like, oh, is he going to talk about me like that? So, always be the positive force, being the positive light for people, and not being a negative voice in the group.
And listen, we all do it. You know what I mean? There's the times where you just want to complain, you're going to do these things, but you got to catch yourself. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
it's like it's your character. So like you have to work on that. If you find yourself, getting into that rhythm where you're constantly, um, you know, being a negative person and putting out that negativity, you can feel it in yourself, and it's just like, this is not me, because it goes against your character, so um you're right, bro. That's what people do think. It's like, well, if they're saying this about them, what do they say about me? You know what I'm saying? So
Mhm.
yeah, it's always good to try to find a positive. It's easy to find a negative, very easy. You don't even have to look that hard, right? In any relationship, any room, any community, you can find the negativity without even looking. It's just there. But the thing is that trying to find the positive, that's a trait that you want to develop and a skill. In every negativity, trying to find the positive so that you can be that breath of fresh air. And that's going to, bring the people around you. So if you don't have the people coming to you, it's probably because of a lot of negativity, that you're putting, and you're doing these things, and it's attracting the bad people. So with that, we want to move to the next point is like, we want to do the good things so we could attract the good people.
Yeah, definitely. Because good people with good energy, they don't want to be around. I mean, I'm speaking for myself. I don't want to be around people that are constantly bringing up the negative things in life or about other people, because I don't care about that. I care about the positive things in life. I care about the good things, right? Being the light for people, being a breath of fresh air. I don't want to bring the mood down by being like, "Oh, did you hear what he said? Ooh, that's so stupid," right? I would much rather be like, "Hey, these are things that I think that he does really well." And it almost, if you hear it, right? Like, so I could talk good about Henry, and other people that hear that, they could be like, "Oh, I do that too." And that brings the mood up. Versus if you're like, "Oh, did you hear what Henry did? Blah 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 blah." That will bring the mood down, and they might be like, "Hey, I do that too. He probably feels about that, or he probably feels the same way about me then." You know? So being a uplifting character will only do good things for you, and it's something that I've noticed. And again, there's a couple things I'm very fortunate about, or that I've been fortunate with, and long-lasting relationships is one of them. And I attribute that to me being a genuine person, and I don't talk bad about others as very often, right? Like I don't. Again, I'm not perfect, but whenever you're with me, it's usually a good time because I'm talking about positive things in life.
Agreed. Yeah, that's important, bro. There's a saying that you can attract more bees with honey than you can with vinegar. So, that negativity is bitter, sour, and it just leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. So, just be that breath of fresh air, to always uplift others, because in reality, it's again, these are just universal laws. When you're negative towards somebody, it actually brings you down.
Hmm.
Your energy levels and stuff like that. So it's again, when you're positive and upbeat, and you can give that off, like, do we go through problems? Absolutely. Are you going to have hardships? Absolutely. Are they going to stay like that forever? Not at all. They're going to change. So, that's just the law, again, of the constant, right? The one constant is change. So, like, the thing that you can control is your character, your actions, and so do the best that you can, and stay positive, stay that breath of fresh air.
Yeah, and that's not to say, like how Henry kind of just said right there. That's not to say like never talk about negative things, or like never talk about things that are like your hardships. Talking about your hardships is being inviting to people, or you're being open with people, right? That's never a bad thing, or that's hardly a bad thing, but it's more so if you're only talking about, oh, I have this coming up, oh, this is a problem, oh, this is a problem, you're a problem, he's a problem, I'm a problem, those type of things, right? But if it's just like, hey man, I'm going through a tough time right now, blah 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 blah, it's that's something different. That's energetically something different. But that kind of brings me to the next point, which is wanting more for yourself, not because others tell you to, but because you tell yourself you want it, right? So I was listening to a podcast a bit ago, or like earlier today, and it was a student, or it was someone pursuing their medical license, or they were trying to become an RN, and they were like, "Oh, I didn't do it. My family told me to do it." And so again, that kind of goes back to you know, they're not doing it because they want to, but because others told them to.
And that there is, sometimes, parents, uh, they instruct their kids, hey, you got to do this, you got to do that. The old adage of go to school, get a good education so you can get a good job, mentality. And that's fine for those that want to do that. But, there's a lot of people that you see later on in their life. What ends up happening is they get to, a crisis in their life where they just realize, like, hey, my identity is this, but this is not really what I want. And you're seeing it, every day in people, 40s, 50s, 60 years old, just like changing, so you see, like, they'll change their careers, some, divorce, unfortunately that's negative, but like these things are reality because they were living a life that somebody else wanted for them as opposed to the life that they wanted for themselves.
Exactly, exactly. Living the life that you want to live, living for yourself, and not, I mean, not to be super self-centered. I'm forgetting the word that I was going to use, but not being so egotistical. But again, you have to know what you want, to get what you want, right? But that doesn't mean that you can't allow others in, or that you can't have input, right? Even a king or a ruler, he still has a council, a committee, a cabinet, right? So again, it's just taking in what people say, but not allowing what people say to dictate your life.
Let's stay on this topic right here for a minute because it's true, bro. I think that, like, knowing what you want is probably the key thing, to understanding and figuring out. I think a lot of times we do get down that path where, we just don't really know and we just start going one way or the other, So it's important that you take that time wherever you're at in life, to really figure out, like, okay, what is it that I really want, because the reality is we only have, this one life to live. That I've been reading these few books lately, it's like 4,000, it's called 4,000 weekends, so like
Mm,
the anticipation of life of how long, so like, what are you going to do with it? If you got 4,000 weekends, it's like, how many have we already spent, and are you where you want to be? And if you're not, then you have to evaluate it now, so you can get what you want for yourself.
yeah, definitely. And I want to just kind of highlight that weekend part, right? Like, there's so many people where they're misaligned, or they're doing things, and I understand, right? You have to do stuff to keep the lights on, right?
Right.
So there is that element, but there's also an element of people are only waiting for the weekend, right? Like, I'm living for the weekend. I'm living for Friday. And there's a guy called Gary V, or Gary Vaynerchuk, or whatever his name is. But Gary V, he talks about loving the week. He's like, I look forward to Monday. I love Monday because I get to start grinding even more. And so that's kind of the mindset that I've been having, where people who ask me sometimes, like, I work pretty much every day, but I'm not consistent every day, or I'm not going 9 to 5 every day. I'm working in like 2 hour intervals. But I say, me personally, I take hours off and not days off. And also, it's a different mindset of I'm working because I want to work, or I'm doing things because I want to do things.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree with that, bro. It's you're right, so everybody's in a different stage of life, so it goes back though to, our next point we're talking about is, just being internally happy, where you're at right now, versus, trying to seek external, happiness. And sometimes, it comes, but it's fleeting, right? It only comes for a little bit. It doesn't last. So just being comfortable, with where you're at. And if you're not, then that's kind of like the signs and warnings that something's got to change, right?
Definitely, definitely. And like you just said, it the external will come and it will be good, but it's fleeting, right? The weekend, it's only 2 days. So if you're only looking forward to the weekend, you're only happy for 2 days. Realistically, sometimes only one day because, you know, maybe Sunday or Saturday, that's like your catch up day. That's your errand day because you're working, you know, throughout the work week. So then you only have really one day, or if you have kids, well, then you only have a couple hours, right?
Right.
So instead of being externally happy, right, like, oh, it's payday, finally it's payday, or finally it's the weekend, you're only happy for that short amount of time. Versus if you're internally happy, it doesn't matter what day it is, right? That mentality of every day is Friday for me, right? You hear a lot of millionaires or crypto millionaires say that a lot, but it's because they're happy internally. And you don't have to be rich to be happy internally. There are people in India who have far, far, far less financial growth or financial freedom than a lot of people do in the West, or even homeless people in the US, right? Um, Really quickly, there's a phrase that I picked up from a friend. You know how people are always like, oh, people in Africa are starving. There's
Right.
people in your own city that are starving. You know, like we don't have to push the problem or the we don't have to push that narrative all the way to a different continent. There are people in your own city, in your own state that are starving, right? And so again, there are homeless people in your city, probably even near your own neighborhood, depending on where you live. Shout out to California. But um, there are people who are suffering financially, but they may not be suffering mentally.
I was just giggling about that, saying that you said there's children, and we're not laughing at the fact that because it is a reality, but that's something when I was a kid that, our family always said too. It's like to eat your food, and it's just a different way of saying be grateful for what we have,
Mm-hmm.
that's the internal happiness. Maybe some have a lot, some have a little, and it's not about what you have, it's about what you have inside, so it's
Hmm.
just and when you have it inside, going back to giving that value, you're going to get the value. So we all have something of value to contribute to others around us, to our communities, to our job, to our families and stuff like that. So, don't get caught up, oh, if they did me wrong, I'm not going to do to them, or I want to return, make them feel like, no, the thing is forgive and keep moving on, because that's going to help you for the breakthrough, So forgiveness is probably one of the things that need to take place, when you're giving value, so don't let the hurts, set you back. Keep pushing,
Definitely. We could probably make a whole topic about that for
Yeah.
a future episode because that's good. But yeah, just knowing what you want because you want it will give you drive to keep going because it's what you want. It's not what your parents want. It's not what your teacher wanted. It's not what your cat wanted. It's not what your raccoon wanted. Shout out to my raccoons. But it's just again, it's a different place energetically speaking, right? If it's coming from the external, oh, my mom told me that I should become a doctor, so I'm going to become a doctor, right? That could be motivating and that could be your why, but again, it's always going to be from the external, which is only it's finite. versus if it's coming from inside, right? My mom told me that I have to be a doctor. Well, I want to become a doctor because she told me to, right? It's a different shift. It's the I want to, not just it stops at my mom telling me to, right? And if you talk to others, and I talk to people pretty much daily, sometimes very random people, but you can kind of hear where their drive is, right? It's like, oh well, I'm only doing this because I need the paycheck. And again, I completely understand that. That's kind of the world that we live in the Western society, but they don't feel fulfilled, right? And so there are people who, again, may not be making $50,000 a month. I'm sorry, a year, um, but are making maybe $30,000 a year, and they're scraping by, but they're doing what they love, right? There's like the cliche, the poor artist, right? Well, that artist, they feel more fulfilled than someone who's doing a 9 to 5 job that they don't like to go to.
Yeah, I agree, bro. And that's my saying is like I don't need money to make me happy. My bill collectors, my utility companies, they're the ones that need money. So I got to get out there because I enjoy turning on that light switch, right? And that lights work, turning on the hot water and the warm water runs. So
Mm-hmm.
those things, yeah, we have to get out there and do what we got to do. But again, the thing is you want to find what brings you that internal happiness because you're doing it for you, right? Some maybe you're not in that place where you're saying, "Oh, I can do whatever I want," like having that leisure of working in 2 hour spurts like Joseph's able to. I do that too, but there's times that I have to go out to the field. So it's a work in progress, but it's rewarding, right? Because you're getting out there, you're dealing with different people, you're bringing value. But it stems not from the outward things that are going on, it's from the internal workings, right? So like the journaling, the reading, the exercising, all these things, the habits that we're putting in, it's beneficial for our life. We're doing things our way and enjoying it and making it happen. So again, if you're not doing things because you want to do it, you're doing it because this is what was instructed on you and you're not happy, there's the chance to change things. We're not saying throw everything out. Not saying
Yeah,
that, but we're just saying that like, small increment steps and you can start, becoming the person that you want to become.
yeah, definitely. And just being the person who wants things in their life versus someone who's letting things happen in their
Mm.
life, right? Like again, that person who said that they were becoming a nurse because their parents wanted to, right? They're kind of just letting life happen versus they're pursuing it, they're doing it, they're actively achieving it because they want to, versus like, oh well, I like, oh, I just went to college because that's what everyone told me to, right? That's a very common example, especially in my age group,
Right.
where I mean that was still relevant in your time as well, but the narrative for the past 50 plus years has been go to college, you'll get a better degree or a better life, right? You'll make more income. And so people will just be like, okay, well after high school I'm just going to go to college because that's what everyone told me to.
Right. It's funny because I went to the dentist earlier this week and I was talking with my dentist there and we were just talking about life and, how's everything going, small talk, before he started inflicting pain on me. Um, but, with that, we were just talking about this actual topic here about like, most people don't want to work nowadays. They're going to school and, they come out. He was talking about dentists that come in and he's having to train them and they don't really want to work, they leave. And I think that stems back from this, like their parents, their family, or somebody that wanted that for them more than they wanted that for themselves. So it's it's important that you do what's best for you, so you can become what the best version of you.
Yeah, definitely. And that leads us into our next topic, which is being aligned in your actions and your goals, and don't want something and then do things that work against those goals, right? So if you're someone who wants to become a dentist, don't apply to become a psychologist, right? Or if you want to become a good wife, don't do things that wouldn't make you a good wife, right?
Right. Yeah, no, for sure, bro. You know, you got to be aligned with your actions and your goals. You know, you have to every day you have to put in the effort, you know, to accomplish it. You know, I was sharing with Joseph the other day, you know, like I have my little regimen that I do, but a lot of times I find myself sitting there, you know, what should probably take me 30 minutes to read. I sometimes drift. I jump on my phone, so I'm jumping between these things, you know, and that's not really aligned with my actions because my action is get this done so that I can go utilize the time elsewhere, right? So this is like something that I decided to implement is like, okay, I got to get all this done within a certain time, you know, so that I can continue. So I know it's simple and elementary, but if we don't do the simple elementary stuff, you can't do the big hard stuff, you know, so and expect those results, you know.
Exactly, yeah. And you can't try to say like, "Oh, I want to become a millionaire," but then you don't do anything to improve your finances or improve your earnings, right? There's a lot of people that will say, "Oh, I want to become a millionaire," but then they stay in the same job, they make the same wage every year. You know, granted, there may be a little pay raise every couple of years or whatever the company does, but again, like you can't just become a millionaire. You can't just become uh, someone who's fit. You can't just become whatever you're trying to reach for if you don't take or if you don't do the steps needed to become that thing.
You got to be specific too, you know, because 1 million makes you a millionaire, but you got to pay taxes on that. So about 50% of that is gone. So now you're not a millionaire. So be specific, you know, that's the, one of the things we talked about before is being specific, you know, and knowing what you really want, you know?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And Myron Golden talks about this in at the time of recording in his most recent video, right? Like, if you want to become a millionaire, a lot of the times it's just a gap between knowledge and knowing the wealth process. Or and we'll get into that process, but basically what he was saying is just like if you want to become a millionaire, there's a gap between knowing how to become a millionaire and then becoming a millionaire.
No, I agree, bro. And you know, it's just principles, simple principles, you know, toward, you know, that wealth process. But you know, wealth is more than just being a millionaire, right? Wealth is, you know, financially secured, you know, relationships, everything is flowing. That's wealth, you know, and that's kind of like the process, you know, of where you want to move to, you know.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And even though I keep using the example of millionaire, just becoming a millionaire does not mean that you're a good person or like a better person or anything like that. And maybe we should have a topic about that as well. But again, money does not make a person. The character makes the person.
Right. Now, all you know, they say that all that money does is just amplify the type of person you are, you know.
Hmm.
So if you're a good person, then you're going to be a better person. You're going to be more giving. But, you know, if you're not, then, you know, it's going to go the other way. So, yeah, definitely, you know, and always in all things, right? The whole moral of this podcast today is talking about bringing the value. You know, the value that you give is the value you get. So when you get up there, you know, it's a different, you know, set of issues. You know, so becoming a millionaire is one thing. Staying a millionaire is another thing, and then you have all the people that are come at you, you know. So it's like important that you put these good things in you now, you know. So this is
Hmm.
your training ground, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. And so going back to the wealth processes that Myron Golden was talking about, one of them was knowing what people want and how to serve their problems, right? So many times, and I myself included, but I've learned about this now. But oftentimes we make a product because we want a product versus making a product because that's what the market wants.
Yeah, I think Zig Ziglar said if you help enough people get what they want, you're going to get what you want. But the key issue is to, you know, see the need and meet the need, to bring that value and help people, and stuff like that. So
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of the past perceived value, right? So if there's like a value of, oh, I need to know how to do this, or like let's say I'm trying to think of the example that he gave, but it's more so along the lines of if there's a value that you perceive, right? So people will buy vintage cars because there's a perceived value of, oh, I didn't have that thing whenever I was a kid because I wanted that specific car as a kid, right? Or if there's like maybe there's like a shoe brand or whatever that you always wanted as a kid, and then now that you have money, there's a value between that because you're like, oh, I never had that as a kid.
yeah, I agree, bro. That's why it's important, to know what you want, have that goal, put that plan in there so you can achieve it, and make the small goals, so you can stick with your alignment and accomplish, what you're trying to create, and build for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of goes back to my personal process, which is the 12-week goal, or the, I'm sorry, the 12-week year, because it breaks your year up into three different or four different goalposts. So every week, you're like, okay, was I still aligned? Am I still following the track right? So let's say I want to lose weight and I want to gain muscle, right? And I dial those numbers in, right? Like, let's say I want to lose 50 pounds but gain 30 pounds of muscle, right? Well, there's a specific training regimen and macros and, all that jazz that would go into it. And every week I could be like, hey, did I do my reps? Did I do my thing? Did I eat my macros? Did I, am I fulfilling my goals to get to my bigger goal?
Yeah, no, definitely, bro. It all compiles, right? So like every little bit that we do, it compiles. So don't take it for granted, guys, that like, this is insignificant. It doesn't really matter. It does matter. It all, uh, adds to the process, saying the again, back to our topic is like the value that you give is the value that you get. You want to be that breath of fresh air, because you don't know what somebody's going through. So, you might be the one to be able to help them solve their problem, and just being a positive force for others, knowing what you want for yourself, not others that are telling you what you should do. Cause there's a lot of, they'll do a lot of shooting all over you, So,
Yeah.
get what you want, and stay, in that internal happiness, and do these things that align with your goals, And yeah, so with that, Joseph, I mean that, you know, do you have any final thoughts or anything you want to share upon closing this out?
Yeah. So just fundamentally be the person that you want to be and be the person who you would want to be around, right? So not only be the person who you want to be in the future, but be the person that you would want to hang around with, right? Don't be the person who you don't want to be around. Don't be the negative, be the positive version of yourself.
Very well said. Thank you again for tuning in to our podcast today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget, wherever you hear us, subscribe, leave a comment and a review. It helps great people like you guys find our podcast. And with that, we're out. Stay blessed.
Bye bye.